Story 1. In the back of the grocery store where I worked was a machine called a cardboard baler. You would toss your broken down boxes into the machine and press a button. It would compress all the cardboard until it was full enough to bale it with wire, then place it on a pallet jack to take it outside. A couple of employees discovered that the press only goes down to about 18 inches from the bottom, just low enough to scare a new hire. They took a new employee to the back to show him how to work the baler, tossed him inside, slammed the door, and started the machine. The new employee screamed in fear, thinking he was about to be crushed, but the safety feature engaged. Then the two employees said, "Just kidding," laughing out loud. They were fired. Story 2. She showed up to her second shift, stumbling and smelling of alcohol, while making jokes about the fact there was a bar across the street. She was a delivery driver. Goodbye. Story 3. I worked at a university. A man was hired for the maintenance crew. Later that day, a woman's bike was stolen from the bike rack outside the maintenance office. The next day, the bike reappeared on the bike rack with a new lock. She called campus police, and while they were taking a report at the bike rack, the new maintenance worker came out to leave on the bike he had stolen from her. He was fired. Story 4. A man tried to call off work, claiming his ride got into an accident during a winter rain and snow mix and put their truck into a ditch. He texted the supervisor an unsolicited picture of the truck in the ditch. She showed me the picture, saying, "Look who called off again." I looked at the picture and noticed something strange. There were pine trees in it, which are uncommon in our area. I searched truck in ditch winter, and it was the very first image that appeared. She wasn't very upset, and we laughed about it. She didn't intend to issue any disciplinary action. Later, I found out that when she showed him the image from the search after he kept insisting on the accident, he became irrationally angry and threatening, so she terminated his employment. Story 5. Two co-workers were out one night and one of them hurt his hand and had to go to the hospital. He still came into work on time the next morning. The other one called in saying he was still at the hospital with his friend and could not make it in. Story 6. Stole cash from the register that had a camera pointed at it. She could see the view of the camera on a monitor right by the register, so she knew she was in frame. Story 7. A fellow journeyman fitter earning $130 an hour in total compensation, plus a work truck with a gas card, decided to spend many hours on the job collecting bottles and cans around the job site so he could turn them in for 10 cents each. He was fired for wasting company time to collect $10 a day in recyclables. Story 8. A man was fired for forgetting to mute himself during a Zoom call, where he spent 10 minutes explaining to his cat why our boss lacks effective leadership skills. Story 9. A man was caught stealing office snacks on camera after Human Resources sent an email stating, "We have cameras. Do not steal the snacks." A coworker called in sick and then posted Instagram stories from a pool party the same afternoon. Story 10. Brand new cake decorator at my HEB turned in a cake with the words, "I just remembered I hate decorating cakes." Story 11. A lunch teacher at my elementary school would hover over kids, yelling at them to stop talking and eat their food. She got fired because a student complained to the principal that they could not talk during class or lunch. When were they supposed to socialize? Story 12. When selling flooring, we had racks of runners and entrance mats that were cut to length. The man put one over his leg to cut it with a Stanley utility knife. Obviously, he cut into his own leg, and then when he came back from that injury, he did it again. Story 13. Worked in the kitchen. A coworker was caught attempting to steal a bag of napkins. He put a whole pile of them in a paper bag, looked up at the security camera, then tried to subtly hide the napkin bag under the counter. Someone found the bag filled with napkins and checked the security cameras. His behavior was so suspicious it was obvious he was trying to steal them. Management decided that if he tried to steal these, he had probably already stolen other things, and they fired him. It was his first and only offense. Right after he was fired, COVID-19 started. Last I heard, he spent all of COVID unemployed, struggling to buy insulin for his girlfriend. I never imagined someone's life could be so affected by napkins. I felt bad about the whole situation, but I had nothing to do with it. He was probably stealing the napkins because he couldn't afford toilet paper. Story 14. She was not fired, but I used to work at a bulk health store called Nutter's. A new employee left on the same day she started. She informed us about halfway through her shift that she had a nut allergy and could not handle most of the products in the store. The store is called Nutter's. She decided to find a new job that day. Story 15. An intern took a nap at work, but chose to do so on one of the comfortable couches in the executive suite. Story 16. Having an affair with the married boss. When both stopped getting along, it became strange. The boss not only ended the affair but also fired my colleague. Story 17. He was a packager at a dispensary hub. He put a bunch of loose cannabis in his pockets and tried to sell it to employees during the first break, which is as long as he lasted. Story 18. The boss asked the new administrative assistant to order some sandwiches from Jimmy John's while he worked through a lunch meeting. This was one of the assistant's job duties. The assistant disappeared for 3 hours before coming back and throwing the sandwiches on his desk an hour after the meeting had ended. The boss gently asked her what had happened, and she started screaming and cursing at him, blaming him for giving her an impossible job and claiming she couldn't find a Jimmy John's after 2 hours of driving around. Jimmy John's had delivered to the office many times before. She was fired for screaming and cursing at the boss and for not handling the job appropriately. I was the boss. She kept screaming the whole time she cleaned out her desk. Story 19. Forgot to drink water and passed out on the job after being told and virtually forced to take water breaks. The person still did not drink water or even sit in front of the ice-cold misting fan we had set up. The supervisor was gracious about it, took care of the injury, drove them to the doctor, and paid for it out of pocket. However, the supervisor was seriously concerned they would do something similarly unsafe and get seriously hurt next time, especially in construction. If this person had been on scaffolding, they could have died from a fall. The supervisor let the person go but still gave them some money at termination because the supervisor was not heartless and understood they needed to put food on the table. Story 20. I own my company. I came back from holidays and noticed a few new hires I had not met. I went into the canteen to grab a tea, wearing casual clothes, and saw a guy loading a large backpack with a few €100 worth of snacks. It was mid-morning, so the place was empty as people were working. I casually asked what he was doing. He explained the snacks were free and there was no limit on how many you could take. He suggested I should take some too, handing me a box of 48 Kit Kat Chunky bars. I declined, saying if I took them, there would not be enough for everyone else. I imagined, based on his expression, he felt disappointed at the company all-hands meeting when he realized who I was. His manager fired him that afternoon and said he would not be arrested if he emptied his bag and returned all the snacks he had taken on previous days. In fairness, he did. 3 suitcases were needed to return his boxes of snacks. He was there for 1 week. Story 21. Hired a man to be a welder. He kept asking where the spools of copper were stored. By lunchtime, he had stolen a forklift and tried ramming the storage bay where the copper was kept. Only manager keycards could open the storage bay. Story 22. I used to work as a bartender for a large, well-known hotel chain. One day, another bartender decided to steal a case of beer. To do this, he took it to the loading dock, which had security cameras, placed it in the middle of the well-lit area, and covered it with a cloth. By the time he returned with his car, a security guard was waiting for him and said, "If you are going to insult our intelligence this much, you deserve to be fired." Story 23. Day 1 of orientation with about 20 other people. A woman in a professional skirt and blouse stepped onto the stage and began to introduce herself. A man from a nearby table whistled, essentially catcalling her. The presentation stopped immediately, and the man was escorted out. We all received a lesson on unwanted sexual advances instead. Story 24. Not really dumb, just memorable. Working at Sonic in the 1990s, I was training a new guy who seemed perfectly normal for an 18 to 20-year-old. He was a weekend stoner and got along with the car hops without being a creeper. He learned the grill and prep station quite well in only a couple of days. On his 3rd or 4th day, he was prepping onion rings when the owner of the local franchise came in to do paperwork. The owner walked by the prep table, and the new guy turned and slapped him across the face with a hand covered in batter and breadcrumbs. The owner jumped back. The guy then pulled one of his own legs up by the ankle with one hand, hopped on the other leg, and played air guitar with the batter-covered hand, screaming, "I'm Rockstar Gandhi," at the top of his lungs. He guitar hopped all the way out the door, screaming the whole time, then took off running. We never saw him again, and he did not come back for his paycheck. Story 25. A man was dismissed for bringing an unmanned aerial vehicle to work and operating it during his lunch break at a secure facility. How careless can someone be? Story 26. A coworker was bragging about how they were going to block some married man on Instagram after receiving money for lingerie and a hotel room. Why did she think she would get away with it? Because she did not give the man her last name, of course. Both her Instagram and Facebook were public at the time, so if you looked up her Instagram handle, literally everything about her appeared. I told her this, and she did not believe me. So I walked up to her, searched her username on Google, and showed her what appeared on my phone. She started freaking out when she saw that you could see where she lived and worked. We told her she should just apologize and return the money. She did not want to because she was pathologically difficult. The man showed up at our workplace looking for her. She was fired not long after, to everyone's relief. This happened years ago, but she remains a prominent figure in our corporate office lore. Story 27. The man was a police officer for over a decade and was fired for running multiple women's license plates through the system to get their phone numbers and hit on them. They complained, and using the system for a non-law enforcement purpose is a crime in itself. This clearly becomes a huge problem for the agency. He also had a wife and children at home. Story 28. Worked security at a government department. A man on the night shift was walking around doing his checks one night in the building. He saw a PC on with no one around. He started looking at inappropriate content on it. The PC was on because the person was remotely connected from home for work. He had a disciplinary meeting and took his mother along as a support person. His mother tried to say her son does not view inappropriate content. The supervisor provided proof of everything he had been looking at, including times and details. He was dismissed. Story 29. Somebody who worked for me was hired by one of the top consulting companies through their usual graduate recruitment process. One of my hires was sent on a training course but did not return. We learned he had asked his girlfriend to stay with him at the hotel, decided nobody would miss him at the training, skipped the training, and they just stayed in the hotel room, thinking we would continue paying for it. Human Resources found out about the travel expenses and his absence from the training. I had the unpleasant task of contacting him to inform him that he was fired and that we were deducting the hotel charges from his paycheck. How completely foolish can you be? Get a great job just out of college and ruin it like that. Story 30. While cashiering, they ran their employee rewards card or loyalty card for random customers so they would get small discounts on store brands. Sounds altruistic, right? And I am sure her motives were altruistic. Well, the company did not think so and considered it tantamount to stealing since my former coworker continued to rack up redeemable points with these transactions. Points that only the cardholder can redeem. This is why even the United Food and Commercial Workers discourage this practice. They do not have an argument against the company and cannot save anyone who is terminated for doing it. Story 31. A coworker would take an empty trash cart outside to pretend he was taking out the garbage so he could smoke a cigarette. He did this at least 5 to 6 times a day. It was a small business that did not produce much garbage. People started complaining, so the boss finally noticed he was going in and out frequently and decided to check the cameras. As soon as he came rolling the cart back in, he was fired. Story 32. We call it turkey bacon when someone says something sexually inappropriate because the security guard we hired used that as a weird stage name. He even bought Velcro name tags for his vest. On the company communications chat, he mentioned his body count, and one of the upper management members intervened before any supervisors could respond, advising him to reconsider the information he shares. He replied with something like, "Why? I have no shame." He also broke the non-disclosure agreement and posted the job site on his very public social media, while complaining about how professional he is and how unprofessional some guards are. I called him out and he blocked me. Story 33. Number 1. We received a call from a truck driver who reported seeing one of our company vehicles swerving across the road. It turned out the driver was intoxicated at 9 a.m. He had started working 2 weeks earlier. Number 2. An employee at a technology company, where cameras are installed throughout the premises, stole a tablet from a room. The stolen tablet had been sent back to the company for repair. The employee was terminated for stealing a broken device. Story 34. I worked at a bank, and one of the tellers called out, saying she would be out for the week because she had appendicitis. It was bank policy that after 3 days of being out sick, the bank manager would audit the teller's drawer, which was locked in the vault. When the manager counted the cash in her drawer, it was several $1,000s short. She ultimately admitted to borrowing the money. She said that her boyfriend had a monetary settlement coming in a few days, and they wanted to take her kids on vacation with it, so she borrowed the money, called in sick to work, and went to Florida. She claimed his check would arrive while they were on vacation, and she thought she could return to work after a week and repay the cash without anyone knowing. She should have faced charges for bank robbery, but for some reason, they took pity on her and simply fired her on the condition that she repay the money in full. I believe management was covering themselves because a teller should never be in a position to leave the bank after their shift with several $1,000s in their possession. Story 35. Oh man, my fake brother unofficially adopted. I was working at this warehouse for high-end shoes, and they treated us all so well. They literally threw $1 million New Year's party every year. They were making $12 billion a year, and we got catered lunch daily. Our insurance was 100% coverage. Not exaggerating. I had no medical bills while working there. This is unheard of, I know. I used to tell the front desk, I promise I don't owe you a copay, and they'd roll their eyes, charge me anyway, and human resources would run a check to me for the $20 2 days later. They were so used to it. Companies can afford to treat you well, but all of them seem to choose to do the least legally required by law instead. Capitalism. Anyway, I got my friend like a brother to apply. He interviewed well and got the job. He went to orientation. On the safety tour, they told everyone what the emergency stop does. Then they said, do not hit this button if it is not an emergency. He immediately hit the button and shut down the entire conveyor belt for the building. They just looked at him and walked him to the door. He never even got assigned a department. I am still flabbergasted by it to this day. He was like, I don't know why, man. I just couldn't resist. Story 36. Showed up to work high on methamphetamine. For context, I work in the kitchen, and this is not unusual. What was unusual was when she became convinced that one of our takeout customers was the Antichrist and started screaming at him in tongues from the kitchen. There is not much you can do to recover from that. Story 37. As a manager at General Nutrition Centers, I hired a woman who was a solid fit with the team. After 2 to 3 days, she did not call or show up. I later found out it was because her boyfriend did not like her working with men. Good luck. Story 38. When I was working at McDonald's, one of the other girls called her drug dealer from the store phone in the manager's office after her cell phone died, so she could arrange a meetup before she finished work. She was in the junior management training program and all prior to that as well. Story 39. Pizza restaurant. One of our delivery drivers picked up his girlfriend on his way back from a delivery and decided to show off. He raced someone he knew past the high school and rear-ended a parked car. He drove back to the restaurant barely and told the boss that someone else had hit his car. His noisy car was easy for bystanders to recognize, with our company sign on it. Multiple witnesses called the police. Police officers showed up and took the driver's statement. He swore he was only going the posted 40 miles per hour and that the other car was not parked properly. But the evidence was very much against him. His frightened girlfriend was telling the truth, and the boss overheard his contradictory story. He was fired for lying, unsafe driving, and having an unauthorized passenger while on the clock. I do not remember what legal trouble he also faced. Story 40. Our manager hired a new employee, assigned him a task, and fired him after 4 days, saying he did not have it. He did not even have time to complete a full internship but worked normally, quietly, and without showing off. It seems the manager expected him to become a rock star in a week. I still do not understand why they hired him in the first place. Story 41. A coworker at a waste transfer station went to the site manager claiming he found a bag of cocaine. Everyone was called in for a drug test. The only person who tested positive was the one who handed in the bag. The theory is that he dropped it and was worried he would be seen pocketing it, so he pretended he found it on the ground. Story 42. Back when the internet was new, I worked for a company from which you have definitely purchased fuel. We hired a technician to resolve infrastructure issues and identify who was using all the bandwidth. A month later, we received a bill of around $27,000 for bandwidth overrun. It turned out that within an hour of arriving, the technician had set up a Napster node, downloading every file available and resharing them. When we terminated his employment, he was genuinely upset and tearful. He repeatedly said, "But I read the employee handbook, and there was nothing stating I couldn't do that." Story 43. A girl borrowed a lighter from the stock and went out for a smoke. She returned it to its place but got fired for stealing lighter fluid. Story 44. Owners of the security company I worked for were both former law enforcement officers. One was the chief of police who was fired for using city funds to fill his private vehicle. The other faced serious abuse of power charges. The one with the abuse charges behaved very poorly. He caused their non-profit human trafficking organization to shut down because he rescued a woman from being sex trafficked and offered her protection only if she agreed to sleep with him. It was revealed that he was involved with 3 young female guards in their 20s. The 3 women settled for $10,000 each to avoid taking the matter to court. He had a daughter older than me but showed no shame in hitting on me. This behavior was disgusting, and I am currently working with multiple former employees to shut the company down. Story 45. I work for an airline and we fly for free. A new employee decided he would rather be on the beach, so he called in sick but showed up at the airport and boarded a plane. One of the supervisors saw him and allowed him to fly. They halted his flight benefits after the plane departed. I do not know exactly what happened after that, but I never saw him again. Story 46. Called in sick to work, then posted photos on Facebook of her partying while she was supposedly out sick. Many of her coworkers were Facebook friends with her, including some of the managers. Story 47. Slipped on a piece of carpet that was sticking out in the reception area. A claim was filed for a workplace injury. When the cameras from a few days earlier were reviewed, the individuals could be heard talking with another staff member about how they were planning to fall and hurt themselves. Story 48. I worked in the medical office of my county's jail. I was a medical officer, employed by the sheriff's department. Once weekly, a dentist and his assistant, who were contracted to work there rather than being employees of the sheriff's department, came in to treat the inmates. The dental assistant was smuggling in loose tobacco and rolling papers to an inmate by hiding them in the inmate restroom trash can. She was also engaging in inappropriate sexual activity with him in the X-ray room. The inmate cooperated in hopes of receiving better accommodations. The dental assistant was not only fired, but also arrested on a Class C felony charge for trafficking contraband. Additionally, she contracted a condyloma infection, genital warts, from the inmate. Story 49. Most people who work for my company are caught on camera stealing. There is a camera above each register. Can see what you are doing. Can see you ringing up items, cashing out, getting the receipt, then refunding the transaction so the till is not off. However, you have a receipt for the item that looks like you paid for it. They get caught every time. Story 50. Damaging hotel rooms while staying on a company account. Story 51. Working at a call center, we were in training. He took a call and thought the customer sounded attractive. So he took her number from her profile and started texting her. Naturally, she found this highly inappropriate and reported him to our operations manager. He was fired that day and had to explain why to his wife. Story 52. When I worked as the cash loss control officer for a bank, I was called to a branch to investigate a large cash discrepancy. A new teller, who was only 3 weeks on the job, had a significant difference at the end of her shift. Her supervisor had helped her with the reconciliation, and the branch reported that all checks had been made. The next day, I went to the branch and asked to see the teller's reconciliation and microfilm copies. Within 30 minutes, I found 2 deposit slips for over $10,000 that were not properly processed. Both deposits were for the same customer. When I questioned the teller and her supervisor, the teller couldn't remember the transactions, but the supervisor became very nervous. I contacted the customer, who told me the supervisor had personally made the deposits to repay a personal debt he owed. I confronted the supervisor, who confessed to the theft. He was immediately fired and arrested at the branch. Story 53. We hired this guy because he was the son of an employee's friend. Not the worst guy on the planet. A little dim and unsure of himself, but he was kind of a steady Eddie type. Well, imagine my surprise right after lunch when my bookkeeper comes into my office holding a revolver by the grip, pinched between 2 fingers. She discovered it when she needed a post-it note and thought, well, maybe Chuck has some in his desk. She opened the lap drawer and there it was. I know how to shoot, but I don't own a gun. So I emptied the revolver of bullets and shoved it in a drawer. She's freaking out, I'm freaking out, but we didn't want the entire office freaking out. About 10 minutes later, Chuck comes back from lunch. My bookkeeper could hear him frantically searching through his desk, then around his office. Then he started wandering up and down the halls with a worried look, presumably in search of his pistol. Meanwhile, I was wondering exactly how to handle matters. He passed my office on his next circuit. I called him into my office, held up the pistol and asked, "Are you looking for this?" After his eyes finished bugging out, he asked if he could have his pistol back. I said that I would return it to him the next day, but that he needed to go home for the afternoon while we decided what to do. He left and I immediately called the landlord to notify security to never allow that guy in the building again and to cancel his key fob. Meanwhile, my bookkeeper had a locksmith over promptly and issued everyone new keys. The next morning, I fired Chuck over the phone and gave him a month's worth of severance and the promise of a good recommendation letter, mainly as a way to keep him from shooting me in the parking deck sometime in the near future. His mom called me an hour later, very upset that I fired her son. He was about 25 and his mom was calling on his behalf. That should give you a clue. All I said was, well, do you want to come by and pick up Chuck's gun? There was several seconds of silence on the other end. Finally, the woman shouted at someone in the other room, "Did you give Chuck a pistol?" And then hung up. That was the last I ever heard from them. Story 54. Not wearing a mask during COVID-19 when his entire floor was working from home, but he had to show up. A manager saw him through the glass door. He had the mask with him and took it off when he realized no one was there. He filed a wrongful termination lawsuit and won a large settlement. The company was even required to provide a written apology on company letterhead from the manager and her entire leadership chain above to the chief executive officer. Story 55. Tried covertly switching a customer's bank deposit into their own account. Not very bright. The bank found out the next day. The ironic part was that she worked in operations and was one of our auditors. Story 56. While serving in the Army, a young private decided to take a Land Rover home for a long weekend. Realizing he might get caught, he took it to a car park, smashed the ignition, and set it on fire. This was all caught on closed-circuit television. However, it took about a week for the unit to be informed by the police that they had found the burned-out Land Rover. No one had noticed it was missing, and if he had driven it back and left it where he found it, no one would have noticed it was gone. Result: discharged and 6 months in civilian prison. Story 57. The uncle of the ex-husband, who worked at the same place, told his boss that his wife had died. The boss came to the house with flowers and expressed condolences. The wife heard him, walked in, and asked who had died. The man wanted a day off and ended up with a permanent one. Story 58. When I was an 18-year-old, I had a mutual agreement to leave with my old boss. He caught me doing donuts and wheelies on a zero-turn mower. This was not my first offense. He called me into his office and started explaining that he had to let me go. In the middle of this, we heard a loud boom, a crash, and a lot of laughing and yelling. He ran outside and I followed him. 2 of the other summer workers, who were the same age as me, launched a John Deere Gator at full speed off a huge pile of dirt and rolled it. He scolded them and then said to me, "I'm not sure if I can fire you anymore." I told him, "It's all right, I'm still going to leave. Good luck with these two." Story 59. He was fired for stealing toilet paper. He could easily have taken hundreds of dollars worth of small tooling from the computer numerical control machine shop, but instead, he took toilet paper. Story 60. My former colleague and flatmate was recently fired for posting an inappropriate rant on LinkedIn about Jeffrey Epstein abusing children. This outcome does not surprise me. Another person I worked with years ago lied about his legal right to work, and a human resources employee failed to verify his information. After 2 weeks, he was escorted out of the office, appearing surprised. He was a good person, and sometimes I wonder what happened to him. Story 61. Worked at a place that made safes. A man used a forklift to put one in the back of his truck at lunchtime. He came back the next morning as if nothing had happened. I was shocked and saddened that he was fired and then arrested. Story 62. They were caught writing in extra tips. They were arrested at the restaurant. Story 63. Drunk, pants down, dancing in the kitchen at work on the prep bench, singing, "I see you, baby, shaking that ass, shaking that ass." Story 64. An employee was terminated for consistently displaying inappropriate content on his second monitor during the workday. This occurred in a semi-open office, and he sat at the front, making the screen visible to anyone who walked by. Story 65. Drove through the identification checkpoint gate, still smoking a joint. Where I work is pretty lax about weed usage. Just don't be stoned at work. That's basically it. This person literally went through the guard shack with a joint in the ashtray, still burning. That being said, he was already on his way out from what I have been told. This just made it a lot easier. Story 66. A coworker was caught snoring while sleeping underneath the unit he was working on. Story 67. He gave his car to his sister during lunch break and then stated he could not come to work because he did not have a car. He also said he could not work from home because his laptop was in the car. Story 68. Small business. The delivery car is registered in my name. Police were called twice looking for me because someone had reported the delivery driver. I gave him the benefit of the doubt the first time but fired him after the second. I still don't know what he did. Story 69. Stole $500 from the safe, which he was fully aware had excellent camera coverage. Story 70. A grocery store chain had a grand store opening, proudly showcasing their expansive wine, liquor, and craft beer department. They hired a director with extensive buying experience in this field to oversee the operation from the start. He showed up drunk to the grand opening, thinking no one would notice. Story 71. Our job was showing occupied apartments where people still lived for the landlord to re-rent. You had to be friendly and helpful, supervise, make sure people did not touch the tenants' belongings, answer questions, and lock up afterwards. This person finished an apartment showing, stayed in the apartment, and started eating the tenant's cereal out of the box with bare hands. The tenant had cameras and sent us the video while he was still there eating. Story 72. Sending death threats to me on WhatsApp. He said he would kill me if I broke something on his truck or if any of his belongings went missing. The truck was full of garbage, and I cleaned it out first thing in the morning. I sent the screenshot to dispatch and never saw him again. Story 73. A coworker was a key closer at a restaurant. After everybody had left except for him and one female cook. Everything was done, and all 7 of them should have left together. He stayed clocked in, fried an entire case of chicken tenders, split it between them in catering pans, was intimate with her in the walk-in refrigerator, then went home. He was married with children, and she was engaged with children. She kept her job because she was not in a position of authority. She got her fiancé a job there about a month later. Literally everyone who worked there knew what happened except him. Eventually, someone told him, and he had a severe emotional breakdown. Story 74. I work at a brewery and have many funny stories. A server was trading drinks to the kitchen for food to take home, which is basically stealing twice. A bartender was not ringing in cash sales and was literally tossing the cash payments into the tip jar. I caught multiple people taking 4-pack drinks out of the cooler, drinking them in the back while working, and hiding the evidence in their lockers. 2 brewers were fired for losing their temper, screaming at the boss, calling him names, and one even used racial slurs. I have worked with many people who were fired for not doing their jobs properly. For example, an old kitchen manager who had received multiple warnings told the general manager he needed to go home early to finish laundry, while drinking a beer at our bar at 11 a.m. That was not even the last straw. Story 75. During COVID-19, we all had to work from home, so we had a daily check-in, basically just clicking, "I'm okay," or something similar. During our company-wide weekly call, a new employee completely freaked out about it with the chief operating officer and the head of human resources on the call, along with the rest of the United States team. It was funny for a moment, but then it got out of hand, and he was fired that afternoon. Story 76. I worked for the audit team of an international energy firm with headquarters here in the United Kingdom. We hired someone based in Texas to undertake our United States-based work with an inflated salary due to difficulties recruiting the right person. Within a week of receiving their company credit card for expenses, they spent $20,000 on furniture, makeup, and luxurious personal items. They were an auditor. I do not know how they thought they could get away with it. Story 77. A new chef joined the team and went out drinking with us that very first night. Needless to say, he had a bit too much fun and did not return to the boat until 8 a.m. the next morning. He still smelled of alcohol and only had time to go to his cabin and grab his unpacked bag before being escorted off the boat. We left him on the dock as we sailed away. Story 78. A particular receptionist was constantly on her phone at the reception desk despite being told that phones were not allowed during shifts. She received many warnings. One day, she came to work feeling fine and happy, her usual self. About an hour later, she asked someone to cover the desk so she could go to the bathroom. She was crying. When she returned, the manager asked what was wrong. Worried a patient had been abusive. It was not work-related. Her boyfriend had been texting her, and they had gotten into a fight. She needed to go home to resolve it. They told her to go home and not come back due to the numerous warnings about phone use. Story 79. A computer programmer at a bank started wearing expensive fur coats to work. They reviewed her code and discovered that she had been diverting money to her own account. Story 80. A coworker at my workplace was slapping people's buttocks, mostly women's. You can imagine how quickly he was fired. Story 81. He was told his contract was not extended, returned to his position on the assembly line, and repeatedly jammed a screwdriver into equipment used for testing and tuning antennas. He was promptly escorted off the premises and was not allowed to collect his personal items. Story 82. My first job was at a fast food chain. A coworker had an obvious crush on me and started using drugs. He called out one night, then an hour later called the business line, which was the manager's office, to ask to talk to me. The manager answered, recognized him, and gave me the phone anyway. He asked me to go to a party with him after my shift, claiming to have some heavy drugs. I was never interested in him or the drugs. I declined and hung up. The manager asked if it was him calling, and I just rolled my eyes, not wanting to rat but also perplexed that he called in the first place, and annoyed that he wanted me to take heavy drugs with him. He was fired the next day when the general manager arrived. Story 83. Eating pipe dope paste has a sweet taste, but eating it was dangerous. He developed sores in his mouth from it. Story 84. They had a massive drug binge and came to work as a waiter after not sleeping for a couple of days. Then they had a panic attack in the fetal position in the customer bathrooms because they thought ghosts were trying to get them. That person was me. Story 85. They started off mooching drinks when we went out to the bar after work. Then they began asking coworkers to borrow their credit cards, saying it was to buy concert tickets. Thankfully, no one gave them their cards. Then they applied for a transfer to the financial department where they would have access to customers' banking information. Finally, we fired them. Story 86. I guess technically he was already fired, but I used to work at a gas station that had a 3-bay service garage attached to it. We hired a kid to work the register for the gas station and convenience store area. He was really unreliable, frequently showed up late, and rarely paid attention. After a few weeks, my boss got sick of it and told the kid he was letting him go. The kid waited until the front was empty, then ran behind the counter, stole a set of keys to a customer's car, and took off with it. He was caught because he drove the car into the side of a boat launch and almost hit an off-duty police officer who was fishing there. He was high at the time because he was apparently a heroin addict who was already on parole for a previous arrest. When they arrested him, all the previous charges came back, and they added grand theft auto, possession of heroin and paraphernalia, and a driving under the influence charge. Last I heard, he was in jail for a long time. Story 87. A man tried to book time off to play in a local football match but was denied. He then called in sick, but was found out because he was pictured scoring a goal in our local newspaper. Story 88. This will probably be buried, but it's pretty recent and so dumb. We do data entry, entering prescription information. We select the patient from a database, type the date, the drug, quantity, refills, directions, select the prescriber from a database, calculate the day supply, enter the form of the prescription, then send it through. This woman was clearing out duplicate prescriber information from the database. When she went to select the prescriber information, there were sometimes a few different entries that looked similar, and she would delete ones that looked exactly the same. Nobody had ever told her to do this. Nobody had ever even mentioned it. But when she deleted an entry, if there were any prescriptions entered with that specific entry, it would cause an issue. Nobody could figure out why it was happening because nobody had ever been told to do this, so it was difficult to narrow down where it was coming from. She had been doing it for years. One day, someone walked by her desk and noticed her in the process of deleting some prescriber information. She was pulled in and told under no uncertain terms that she was to stop. They explained the problems she was causing, that she was never told to do this, and that if she continued, there would be more intense consequences, including termination. Well, guess who did not stop? I will never understand why. I suspect some form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Story 89. They were caught looking at my boss's office first thing in the morning. Story 90. My office mate was stealing hardware designated for a university. He thought he could manipulate the records and nobody would notice. One day, I arrived at work to find his cubicle emptied, and he was being charged with theft. Foolish behavior. Story 91. A girl I worked with during the mid-shift closed a room with live cameras in it, turned off the lights, and fell asleep. Nobody knew where she was until closing time when we walked into the room. She was fired the next day. Not as wild as others here, but it is the dumbest way I have seen someone lose their job over. Story 92. An employee approached my supervisor while shopping at Walmart and offered to sell her heroin. Story 93. A coworker was recorded covering the security camera with a towel in the maintenance room. Story 94. 1. An employee was fired for accessing inappropriate content not on his own computer, but on the general manager's computer. He was caught by the general manager and another manager. He was suspended and then terminated 3 days later. 2. A senior partner in a medical practice was investigated for bullying when 2 young female staff members found him watching inappropriate content in his office. They reported him, and he was removed from the premises within an hour. Other partners bought out his share for $800,000, which was his original buy-in. According to their contract, if a partner was dismissed, they were paid the amount they invested. The partners sold the firm a few years later for $7 million each. 3. A chef at a hospital where my brother-in-law worked was dismissed for throwing a knife at him after my brother-in-law complained about the food quality. The chef was fired immediately, the police were contacted, and he was charged and found guilty. He then appealed the wrongful dismissal in court, which was costly and ultimately unsuccessful. Story 95. A new employee was fired 10 days after starting. I was working at the time for a self-storage company in the United Kingdom. The new employee turned out to be a massive racist, using offensive language towards black customers after they left and insulting Polish people. He was dismissed by the area manager, who overheard him say that he had offensive items in his car while laughing. The area manager, who was Pakistani, told him in no uncertain terms to leave and not return. That was the last we saw of the new employee. Story 96. Getting a forklift stuck in the sand resulted in immediate termination. Story 97. We had a new wooden staircase installed at work because the old one was dangerous. For some unknown reason, he decided it was a good idea to carve his initials into it with a knife. The boss did not think it was a good idea though. Story 98. One of my call center coworkers had an average call time of fewer than 30 seconds. He would take only 1 in 10 calls, instantly hanging up on the other 9. Story 99. One of my former coworker's husbands is abusive. She called the police one night when he was out of control. When they arrived, they found some marijuana the husband had hidden, which she did not know about. Despite multiple drug tests coming back clean and her never having used drugs before, the State Board of Nursing revoked her license and she lost her entire career. Now she has to pay almost $10,000 to attend a special rehabilitation program and get drug tested every month, including for alcohol, for at least 3 years. If she successfully completes this program, she can apply for a new license. This situation highlights why the nursing shortage continues to worsen every year. Story 100. A colleague of mine was fired because he used company stationery to write fake recommendation letters for his friends who were job hunting. He gave himself a false job title. We worked in word processing, and he claimed to be the office manager. He was caught when a prospective employer called asking for the office manager of the company instead of the person who wrote the fake letter. When the real office manager received the call, his deception was exposed, and he was dismissed. Story 101. The man's wheelie bin was broken, so he swapped it for the document destruction bin in the office. Story 102. My workplace has 2 different buildings on its campus. One employee's direct supervisor worked in Building A, while the supervisor's superior worked in Building B. This employee told the supervisor in Building A that he was going to spend the day working with the superior in Building B, and simultaneously told the superior in Building B that he planned to work with the supervisor in Building A. However, he was working with neither and was fired for it. This situation resembles a subplot a teenager might create in a sitcom. Story 103. I am a nutritionist in early childhood education, working with a team of certified educators to teach young children in a charming play school with keypad locks on every entrance and exit, and many strict but reasonable rules. We care for children aged 6 months to 5 years, so there is extensive clearance required to attain a position, and any mistakes are recorded in a required state registry for early care providers. We had a pre-kindergarten teacher who was very kind, perhaps too kind, as the 4-year-olds often dominated her. She was not caught smoking marijuana, but she did plug her marijuana vape into her work laptop to charge during a school day. She then forgot about it and asked the director to cover the classroom while she took a bathroom break. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.